Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Norfolk Southern Cedartown District in HO scale. Today we're going to be talking about the most recent locomotive kit bash and weathering job that I did, which is this GP38AC Norfolk Southern 2846. I started with one of the Rapido GP38s from their most recent run. These come well detailed for the Norfolk Southern units with the high nose, the ditch lights, all those various details. But most of the straight GP38s on NS were retired before 2010, but a few of the GP38 ACs lasted a little longer, with some lasting as late as 2015, and 2846 was one of those. To better fit my era, I wanted to update the GP38 model to represent one of these GP38 ACs. There are a couple differences between the GP38 and the GP38AC. Most of them are internal, but there are a few external differences as well. Two of the most notable ones are the blower housing, which I'm pointing to now. The blower housing is like that of the later GP38-2 units with the ribs on it instead of being smooth. The other difference is the dynamic brake arrangement and the air filter box. These ex-Southern units had a variety of air filter boxes. 2846 is one that had the angled top to that, but a number of the Southern GP38 ACs had the squared off box as well. I modeled the extended range dynamic brakes that the Southern units had also. The other main external difference between a GP38 and a GP38 AC is in the handrails. There's a slightly different handrail stanchion spacing. I chose not to model that due to, just the risk of, if the holes are even slightly misdrilled, the handrails will end up rather warped when you go to reinstall them. And I decided the slightly misplaced stanchions would look a lot better than, warped and bent handrails on the locomotive. So for the blower housing and the dynamic brake hatch and air filter assembly, I 3D printed these parts. So I drew them up in Solid Edge, like I typically use, and printed them on my Saturn S. I discussed a lot of my design and printing process in the last video that I made on the NSC 2400 hoppers. But the blower housing dimensions, they were easy enough to get measuring some of my other locomotives, and similar situation for the air filter box and dynamic brake hatch. Those dimensions were pretty easily measured from a Atlas assembly. The Atlas one does not have the extended range dynamic brake doors back behind the grid, so that was a area that I had to look at pictures and make some inferences about the design. The fan assembly on top of the dynamic brake, I designed the brake hatch to use Athearn fans because I have a whole bunch of those in my parts box. So it takes a Athearn dynamic brake fan, and those are, I think, pretty readily available from Athearn's parts department as well, so they're not too difficult to find. Now we'll move over to the computer, and I will go through some of the various pictures of the build process, so showing the parts as they came off the 3D printer, showing them installed, showing the locomotive disassembled to work on it, and then showing, putting it back together again in each step of the weathering. Hi everyone, we've moved over to the computer now, where I wanted to show first a few prototype photos and then go through the process of how I kit bashed this model. So the first couple prototype photos we'll look at were taken by my friend Larry Smoke, so lots of thanks to him for letting me include his photos in this video. Here we see 2846 toward the end of its life. This would have been 2014, 2015 or so, I think. We can see some of the differences in details between the straight GP38 and the GP38 AC, so notably the blower housing and the air filter and dynamic brake assembly. We can see those features that I included on the model here. Other things you can see, a lot of these GP38 ACs had all-weather windows at one point, that they were removed by this late in the life and replaced with the standard sunshades and cab wind deflectors. That's how I've modeled this unit. Other unique features of the Southern units, you've got the smaller fuel tanks on here. You've got the lights mounted on the long hood. and the short hood for that matter. You've got the P5 horns on both ends of the locomotive, so you can see it on one end here. You'll see the long hood one in the next photo. You've got the bell, which you can't see here, mounted on the end of the long hood. See, here's the other photo I have from Larry. You can see that second horn on there. Moving on from the X Southern units, we'll look at one of the X N and W units, so I can point out some of the differences in the details. This photo was taken by me. This is the only GP38AC that I ever saw in service. Um, this is at Rome, Georgia, which is about 15 miles north of Cedartown. Um, some of the differences you can see between this and the Southern units. I mean, you've still got the all-weather window on this unit. You can see the larger fuel tank on here. There's no bell on the long hood. On the N&W units, the bell was mounted on the short hood. You don't have the extended range dynamic brakes that the Southern units had. And then on this particular unit, you've also got the square air filter housing instead of the angled one that 2846 has. So there's some of the differences between the two different series of GP38 ACs that Norfolk Southern had based on whether they were ex-Southern or ex-Norfolk and Western units. Moving on, we'll start looking at the model photos now. This is the model as it came out of the box from Rapido. Very nicely done model, lots of detail, looks great, runs well and sounds great as well. But you could see the differences in the dynamic brake housing. So the extended range dynamic brake setup's a little different. It's got the access doors on the back side of the grill here. The filter housing is different. The later angled filter housing was a bit longer, and so you ended up with the front taper on the dynamic brakes being a bit shortened. You can see the smooth blower housing as opposed to the um, ribbed blower housing on the GP38 ACs. So this shows the shell after I started removing some of those details. So again, pulling out the sunshades to replace with more accurate ones. Removing the blower housing, which thankfully on the Rapido unit is not molded into the main shell, but is a separate part. And you can see the dynamic brake hatch has been removed. This shows some of the parts that I added. You've got my 3D printed dynamic brake and filter housing assembly, and you've got the blower housing here. I used Athearn dynamic brake fans in here just because I had a bunch of those fans on hand in my parts box. Um, Gotten a lot of questions about, if I'd make these 3D printed dynamic brake assemblies and blower housings available, and the answer is yes. As we make this video, it's about 5:30 on Tuesday evening. I've got 6 of these on my printer at the moment. So printing the uh, dynamic brake and filter box assembly as well as the ribbed blower housing. So again, 6 of these are on the printer at the moment. 3 will have the square filter box, 3 will have the angled filter box. So it's going to be a very limited run of these, but I am printing up a few of these to sell. I hope to have them, all cleaned up and ready sometime this weekend. So if you're interested, I put a link to my email address down in the description, rocketcityrailroads@gmail.com, and I'm displaying it on the screen here as well. If you're interested in getting one of these conversion sets, which again will just include the dynamic brake housing and the blower housing, the Athearn fans will not be included. So you'll need to either source those yourself, or I think this would probably work with the Atlas or Rapido fans as well, although I haven't tried it. I do know that the housing itself fits well on both the Atlas and Rapido locomotives, so you can use it on either of those. Um, the blower housing, very easy to change out on the Rapido units. If you were going to do an Atlas unit, you'd have to cut the original blower housing off of there, so it's a little more difficult to deal with than using one of the Rapido units. Thinking I'm going to sell this pair of parts for $15 a set plus shipping. So, that shipping cost will depend on where you are in the country. Um, but again, if you're interested in getting one of these sets, contact me at rocketcityrailroads@gmail.com, and I'll put you on the list to let you know when these are ready to go. Moving on from my little advertisement there. Um, Here we see parts starting to be test fitted on the units, so they're just sitting on here for now. I'll take them off and prime them after this. You can also see how I'm removing the numbering on here. So I've just soaked the paper towel, install the set, let it sit on there for 15 minutes or so, and the lettering came off pretty easily just using a toothpick. This shows the various parts that I added installed. So the dynamic brake assembly, the blower housing. Then I installed some Canon sunshade rails and KV models sunshades on here to match what the unit had late in its life during the time period that I'm modeling. And this shows it with all the lettering applied and all of the additional parts painted. So I use Tamiya paints to actually do my painting, and then AK models, um, clear coats, so the gloss before the decals, and then their ultra matte finish to dull everything down. I use that ultra matte finish on everything that I paint and weather. It's it gives a great, very flat finish, and it doesn't do the fogging and high humidity that a lot of flat clear coats do. So I'm a big fan of that. This shows the unit after I've applied the fade. So I do the fading using a very thin mix of Tamiya light gray and their thinner. So it's about 90% thinner, 10% paint, and spray it on in very light coats with my airbrush. Next step in the weathering is putting the dirt mix down on the underframe and the trucks and the fuel tank. So my dirt mix, it's about 60% Tamiya, linoleum brown, um, and then 20% each Tamiya light gray and deck tan. And then I thin that down about 80% thinner to 20% paint, and again spray it on in very light coats on the underframe to get the sort of brown, grungy look that many Norfolk Southern units have. Next, I use AIM weathering powders to fill in the grills on here. First, I go over it with a medium earth powder, and you can see that really looks too saturated and stands out too much as is. But I do two things to remedy that. First, spraying it with the AK Ultra Matte really tones down the color a lot. Then I go back over it with AIM Grimy Black as well. That creates a nice look on those grills so that they, look a little grimier and stand out better from the rest of the faded body. This shows that after I've gone over it with the dull coat, and you can see, or in this case, the AK Ultra Matte, you can see that that really tones down the color on the powders a lot. Then for this final picture, this is after I've gone over it with the AIM Grimy Black as well, and that really created a nice color on there, and then finished everything off with another coat of the AK Ultra Matte. Um, Additionally, when I have the powders out with the Grimy Black, I use a very, very wide, soft brush and get just a little bit of powder on there. So dip it in the little tub of powder, and then wipe basically all of it off on a paper towel and use that soft brush to go over the entire locomotive in long vertical strokes. So that helps, add some little bit of grime to the weatherings, to the lettering, so it doesn't look brand new and really just blends the whole look of the locomotive together. Um, that's a basic overview of the weathering process that I used, as well as the process I used to kit bash this locomotive. And finally, I just wanted to share this picture. I took this morning and really like the way it came out. It shows 2846 along with B32-8 552 switching out cars in the Carrollton yard, getting a G87 ready to run down to Sonoy at the end of the line. You can also see my GP59 and GP50 sitting on the house track over here waiting to be used on one of the other locals out of Carrollton. So now we'll flip back over to the layout where we'll show 2846 along with 552, uh, switching out these cars into Carrollton Yard and getting ready to start heading south. We've returned to the layout now where we see 2846 as well as B32-8 number 552 that's just getting started for the morning on local train G87. They're currently sitting on the south passing track at Carrollton, where they're coupled to a pair of plastic pellet hoppers that they'll take down to the end of the line at Sonoy. On the north passing track, here toward the foreground, there's a cut of center beam flat cars loaded with lumber that they'll be taking to the Noonan transload. So we'll watch as they shuffle some cars around. So, pulling out of the south track, moving up to the north track to grab the center beams, and then we'll watch them as they depart Carrollton, heading south to do their switching for the day. Like all of the ex-Southern high hoods, number 2846 is set up so that the long hood is the front, so in this case the locomotive's actually running in reverse. The sound file that Rapido included on their stock decoders of these included a variety of horns, so I set the horn on this model to be the P5, which is common on these ex-Southern units. Now on the north passing track, G87 stops just short of the Bradley Street crossing to make sure that no cars are coming on the street and that the couplers on the plastic pellet hopper and the center beam flat car are aligned before shoving back the rest of the way to couple. With the EOT hung on the rear and the brake test completed, G87 is ready to depart for Sonoy. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the like button down below and subscribe. We'll see you again soon.